Today we're going to go over cutting bias binding with the AccuQuilt cutting system. Plus, I'm going to share a hack I love to make it even easier. My name is Rochelle Peters. I'm with Treasured Gifts. I'm a quilter and a long armor who loves to learn and share fun and new ideas, so let's get to it. Bias binding is fabric that is cut across the diagonal to allow for maximum stretch. This is helpful when you're doing curved projects such as round quilts or quilts with scalloped edges. AccuQuilt has a number of strip dies available. The one I'm using today is the 2.5-inch strip die. So let's take a look at creating bias binding the AccuQuilt way. We're going to take an 18-inch wide piece of fabric and lay it out on our table. Next, we need to find the bias. And we find the bias by folding fabric up in the corner. We're going to fold it up on one side, and then we're going to fold it down on the other side. And this helps us find where our bias is on the fabric. We want to lay our folded edge along the bottom of the die. So we're going to give it a quick turn, and I'm just going to leave it hanging a little bit off the edge. Our next step is to bring the top folded edge down to the bottom folded edge. Now from here, we could take it to the ironing board and give it a nice press. That really helps make it a little bit easier. I'll show you. So I went over to the ironing board, gave it a nice press on my biased edges. I folded it over, and I gave it another really nice press. This just makes it a little bit easier to handle on my board. So when I lay the fabric on the board, I want to make sure I'm covering my blades. So I'm going to take a peek. I've got the one on the edge here. I want to make sure that this one is over it and that the edge of my fabric is even with the edge of my board. And then I'm going to check the other side. My blade is right here, so I've got that covering, so we're good to go there. The next step is to fold the edges over. So the edge of my blade is right here. So I just want to make sure that my fold is within the edge of that blade, which is right here, and also covering the other edges. Then I'm going to take this side. I'm going to do the same thing. My fabric is now ready to go. Now it's time to cut. I'm going to take my AccuQuilt Go, lay it out, and it's ready to cut. So I'm going to lay it down. And then from here, I'm just going to crank it through. And just like that, my binding is cut. Now I have beautiful bias binding. Isn't that wonderful? I love the way that it cuts, and it's so simple to do. The only way I would try to improve on it is to lessen the number of seams that I have to put together. So what we're going to do is, instead of cutting out of a width of fabric, we're going to cut from a square. I looked up to see how big a square I need to cut to make enough bias binding for a queen size bed. And I was using a 2.5-inch strip width, but that told me I had to do a 30-inch square. Now, if you don't know how to calculate that, there's all kinds of places online. You can just look it up, bias binding calculator, and it'll get you to exactly what you need. So I take my 30-inch square, I fold it in half to make it a triangle. I place the triangle at the top of my board on one of the lines. Then from there, I take the bottom of my triangle and line it up straight with another line on my board. That makes sure that I have my triangle oriented correctly. So next, I'm going to lay my two pieces together with the salvage edges, and so it makes the shape. From there, I'm going to take and sew these two together and then press my seam open. Now I have one large piece of fabric where the bias stretch is through the length of the fabric. Now that I have my piece sewn together, I just need to lay it on my board, and it's super easy. So I'm going to lay this over, and I'm trying to keep this kind of straight along with the edge, and also make sure that I am passing over that blade. So I'm going to fold the fabric over, and what I'm looking for where that last blade is. And I want to make sure that my fabric is just over that last blade. I'm going to kind of give it a little bit of a hand press. Now, as you can see, when I lay this fabric over, I've got a little bit extra here. So we're just going to take that and we're going to fold it over one more time. And again, we're going to line it up so that it is over the blade. The blade is right here. It's over the blade. And we've got that all lined up. Okay. From there, we're going to do the envelope folding, similar like we did with the AccuQuilt method. What I like to do is put my finger right at the edge of this blade so I know where the end is. And then I fold it, roll it over. Roll it right over my hand. And then I lay it on here as straight as I can. Now I am inside that blade just a tiny bit, so I'm going to pull it up just a little bit more to make sure. Okay, so my edge of my blade is right here. So this is where I'm going to make sure I'm in. Then I'm going to take the other side, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to find my blade. I might bring it in just a little bit, put my finger here, and then just kind of roll my fabric over my hand. Now I know some of you may be saying, but Rochelle, we can't do more than 6 layers on AccuQuilt. Well, let's double check that because that's absolutely right. So on here I have 1, 2 layers here. I have 3, 4, 5 because it's folded over, 6 layers. So I am following the 6-layer rule. So let's take a look at cutting it. Got my fabric down and I'm going to run it through. All the way through, let's see what we've got. So now we have perfectly cut bias binding strips. They're the full width of that shape that we had put together. And look how long they are. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. We went from having 14 pieces of binding to sew together to having only 7 beautiful long pieces of binding. And that is my AccuQuilt bias binding hack. Now you give it a try.